Well, I was just telling Bob, I hope we have enough speakers tonight. But knowing Marlene, she's always incredibly professional and puts together a great assortment of people to speak about the incredible man that Jim Jones is. And I've known Jim for a long time, and I think we all can share different stories about Jim, given the fact he's been in public service for over 23 years. I thought I'd start off by telling you how I first met Jim Jones. And I met him in 1997, and he was the Member of Parliament for Markham. And I learned a lot about Jim's character back then, because I think leaders do what is right, not necessarily convenient at the time. And I think we've always seen that with Jim Jones. Back in 1997, it was a difficult time in the federal parliament. We had a divided right who were going to be banished to losing forever, unless there were some individuals who had the courage to speak up for common sense. But the entire establishment in Ottawa was against that. The entire establishment just wanted to keep the status quo. It was in their vested interest to have that divided movement. And Jim Jones was the first voice to speak up and say it did not make sense to have two conservative parties running against each other. And at first, I think there was a fair bit of opposition to that, as I'm sure Jim can recall. Some tough words. But it takes leaders like that to move mountains. And slowly but surely, others followed. But it takes that first brave voice to speak out for what is right. And a number of years later, I think you spoke out in 1998, and by 2004, 2003, we had a united conservative movement. And regardless what you think of the Liberals or Conservatives, it was to Canada's betterment to have a stable democracy. There's no point of having a fractured parliament. And what Jim delivered there ended up being the modern-day Conservative Party that has been in government since 2006. And it was because Jim had the courage to do what was right, to stand up when it wasn't convenient to do so. And that's when I first met Jim, and I thought to myself, there's a person I'd always want to stand next to, someone I'd always want to speak in favor of, because he brings some of the best elements of what politics is. So I want to personally thank Jim for that, because I wouldn't have got elected in Barrie in 2006 if it wasn't for Jim getting the parties united. I thought I would mention another story about Jim. We all know that he has been a successful councillor and member of parliament, and obviously his work for IBM is well noted. I wanted to tell you a door-knocking story about Jim. I was door-knocking with Jim in Markham in 1997, and he accidentally, I learned a lot about Jim, and I've tried to follow his model. He was door-knocking and accidentally went on a driveway that had just been paved. And he was door-knocking for the Conservatives, and the guy came out irate, all upset. And Jim, as cool as a cucumber, said, "I'm canvassing on behalf of your local Liberal candidate." On a more serious note, I wanted to mention a few things that my colleagues in Ottawa think the world of Jim Jones, because obviously his work has left a lasting legacy. I'm glad we had the notes from Tony Clement and Peter MacKay, but I wanted to add that the Prime Minister himself, I know, thinks incredibly highly of Jim Jones. There's not municipal... I don't think there's many regional councillors in Canada that could call the Prime Minister's office when they wanted and be heard and be listened to and respected, but Jim Jones is one of those individuals. I wanted to speak about two of the things that I think Jim is certainly most well known for here in Markham. Obviously, this Markham International Sports Trading Academy is so important. It's one of the things I love about Jim's campaign, because Jim has been championing the notion of fitness. And I want to tell you why I think that's important. I was reading an article recently that said kids nowadays watch 6 to 7 hours of TV a night. I remember when I grew up, I was playing ball hockey and wall ball, and there was 15 channels on TV or 20. And now there's so much competition. There's video games that are like real life. There's and there's so much choice in entertainment that it creates an unhealthy lifestyle. And we wonder why childhood diabetes is going up. We wonder why obesity rates in Canada have gone up for almost 20 years in a row. We need politicians and public servants that recognize that recreation is important. And a previous speaker mentioned, Jim had the fortitude to stand up against the notion of a very expensive NHL arena here. And he's argued for fitness and recreation that everyone can use. And I think that is so important for cities, because if we're going to have sustainable communities, we need recreation. I look at the Nordic countries that have some of the healthiest populations, the longest life expectancies. They also have the most per capita recreation. And I think Jim Jones gets that. I think the fact that we're going to build recreation in a significant fashion in Markham, I think it's a wonderful thing for your community. I want to say that I think you're very lucky to have someone like Jim that recognizes that. I also wanted to talk a little bit, and I think we all have, about his vision on transit. And I know it's been mentioned before that he recognized the potential for the region far in advance of anyone else. I think that speaks to his leadership abilities. But I think this is one of the greatest challenges in the GTA. I know any of us, when we drive in Toronto, it is so frustrating. It is so frustrating because of the wasted time, the quality of life. But it's more than that. The C.D. Howe Institute did a report saying one of the greatest economic challenges for the region is gridlock. Because if you want to get product to marketplace, you need a transit system that works. And the fact that he's been able to build the plan that has now been universally applauded is going to be a great thing for not only Markham, but the entire region. And I thought how Bob put it was so appropriate, because it really is. This is the biggest challenge for the GTA in the years to come, and having someone like Jim on regional council who can have that respect, who can speak to this with passion. And I think anyone that talks to Jim Jones knows that he is passionate about transit. We need someone on regional council who is passionate about transit and gets it, because it's hurting our economy, it's damaging our quality of life, and we need an advocate like Jim to champion that on all our behalfs. Another thing that I wanted to mention about Jim Jones, and something that I really admire, is I've always had the sense with Jim is that he works with all sides. I think far too often in politics there is a mentality that everything the other guy does is wrong and everything the one side does is perfect. And I think what we need public servants who are going to work with all sides. And that's the reputation that Jim had in Ottawa. It's the reputation that I've heard he has here in Markham, and I think that ability to be less partisan, less negative, to lend a hand of cooperation to your opponents as much as you do your friends, I think is one of the things that is lacking in politics, lacking in public service. And I think Jim has been a fine role model for those that hope that we have more of a civil debate in the public discourse. And I want to thank Jim for being that example. I met Jim when I was 19 years old. I think there's a lot of people like myself who met Jim at a young age, a lot of politicians through the years who you've mentored. And I think you've been that good example of what we should aspire for. So I know we're all here today because we believe in Jim Jones. We believe that this region and politics in general needs a friend like Jim Jones. And so that's why I came down here from Barrie tonight. Actually, I was in Windsor this morning. And I'm off to Thunder Bay tonight, but I wanted to be here and ensured that it was in my schedule because that's how much of a fan of Jim Jones I am. And so I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, vote early, vote often, and if you don't live in Markham, move here just for October 27th, because I know in past elections I think in the 1-2 before, you had the highest number of votes of all regional councillors, and I think it would be great to see you do that again. So thank you very much for inviting me to share a few words about my friend Jim Jones.